live on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page or Twitter feed. Let me introduce our guests for the next 60 minutes, and of course you can ask your questions to them directly. 0345 6060 973. Sam Gyimah is Liberal Democrat MP for East Surrey, former Conservative Universities Minister. Mark Francois, Conservative MP for Rayleigh and Wickford, Deputy Chairman of the ERG. Miatta Fahnbulleh is Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, and Mark Fox is Chief Executive of the Business Services Association. So next 60 minutes of chat, political debate, wise words from our panel, and of course from you. 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Welcome to you all. Let's crack on with our first question. It's from Alfie, who's in Lincoln. Alfie, what's your question, please?
Oh, hi there. I just wanted to ask the panel if they could give me one tangible benefit of Brexit, given that even Boris Johnson's government's own analysis shows that we're going to be poorer in every way, and to say thank you to Sam for showing some principle and joining the Liberal Democrats.
Hooray!
Well, I'm sure he'll be pleased with that. Mark Francois, one tangible benefit of Brexit.
We will live in a country that elects its own government, that makes its...
Don't we already?
Well, we elect a government, but half of our laws are made by the EU. So we'll make all of our laws in this country. And if we don't agree with the government and the laws that they have made, we'll be able to vote those people out in a general election. At the moment, the problem is we can't remove European commissioners, whether we agree with them or not. So the fundamental change, and I believe the biggest reason why people voted to leave in the referendum was to take back control, was so that we could genuinely run our own country.
There were figures out this week that show that the economy is already £60 billion smaller than it would have been had we voted to remain in the EU. Is that trade-off really worth it?
Well, for a start, I don't accept that analysis. That's one point of view.
It's from the IFS, and we always have to preface the phrase IFS with respected. So
well, but I wouldn't say unimpeachable. And I think part of the reason that we've been held back is because of all the uncertainty. I believe if we'd left clean long ago, then I think there would have been all sorts of benefits in terms of economic growth. What businesses keep crying out for now is certainty. You hear that again and again. And the quicker we leave, the quicker that certainty will be provided.
Miatta, you are an economist. You work for the New Economics Foundation. Can you think, before, I'm sure you will take issue with some of what Mark's said, but before you do, can you think of a tangible benefit of Brexit?
It's hard to at this point in time, not least because I think all the economic analysis seems to suggest that in the short to medium term, Brexit, whatever version of Brexit, will have an impact on the economy. So in the long term, yes, there might be some upsides, but it's quite hard on the basis of the evidence that we have at the moment for us to know what that upside is going to look like. But what we definitely do know is if we go down a no-deal route, the knock and the hit will be pretty severe, and that's communities up and down the country.
Do we know that, or do we believe that?
No, so in the end, all economists can do is look at the evidence and the information that we have and make a best guess and a prediction.
But economists are so often wrong, aren't they?
They are, but, we don't have a crystal ball, so we can only look at the evidence. We can look at, where consumer confidence is, where business confidence is, where investment is likely to be, and we can make a judgment. And if you have a big disruption, particularly if it's a no-deal Brexit, which will be hugely disruptive, no matter what anyone says, it is going to have a hit. So it's quite hard in that context to think about the sort of sunny uplands because the pain is going to be short and immediate. And I mean, to sort of Mark's point, you say half of our laws are made by the EU. I mean, that's a fallacy. In the end, the laws that matter are made by this government, are made by our sovereign parliament. And, in the end, that referendum, I think, for many people was a rejection of the status quo. I think many people were saying they wanted to change. It was a reaction to the fact that living standards have been squeezed and communities have been hammered. And actually, that's all within the purview of our government. They can take action now to deal with that. And I think that's the big frustration. And, if we're trying to get to sovereignty, but at the same time we're trashing Parliament, which is fundamentally our sovereign body in all of this, you kind of wonder, what is the prize of
ultimately the people are sovereign because they elect Parliament.
All right, Mark Fox.
So it's perfectly possible for these two views to be compatible with one another. Mark's point about sovereignty and democracy is a perfectly respectable one, and what he says is perfectly legitimate. But the point about the economy is also completely consistent. And the trouble is,
You've just been the voice of sweet reason.
No, I'm not at all. Is the Brexit process so far over these 3 years has hammered the economy. The denial of that is extremely, damaging investment.
Well, hang on a minute. Unemployment is at its lowest level for 40 years, all of our adult lives. You've got, we are still in growth, unlike Germany. I mean, it's not all doom and gloom, is it?
It's certainly true that we are employing more people to produce less, and that's a sort of economic version of a Ponzi scheme. So, it's very good that more people are in employment, but you have to look at the nature of the employment. There is no question that billions of pounds of investment in the economy has been lost. It is perfectly possible, if the political punch and Judy show at Westminster could be resolved, that we could recover this position, we could establish ourselves as a strong free trading nation, and so on. But there is no sense so far that our colleagues at Westminster have either the determination or the national interest at heart in the way that they are conducting themselves.
How have Sam and Mark not got the national interest
Because they need their heads knocking together and to sort out a solution and a resolution so that we can move forward on the result of the referendum and establish a new relationship with the European Union and get on with the next chapter in the history of this great country.
Well, look, Sam doesn't want to leave and I do, so how are you going to knock our heads together, Mark?
You've just got to sort out between you a compromise that works, because
you either leave or you don't.
Because at the moment, Mark, we are struggling to attract investment for the future. That's why productivity is falling, and it will be your constituents and your constituents, Sam, not you two sitting in safe seats in Parliament, that will pay the price for this in the years to come.
Sam Gyimah. One tangible benefit of Brexit, can you think of one?
It's very hard to. And I think there is a lot that you can dislike about the EU when you look at it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that leaving makes you better off. And what I've noticed in the last year is the toughest proponents of leave, people like Nigel Farage, have actually stopped arguing for the benefits of leaving. What they say is we had a vote. They don't argue for Brexit anymore. They don't say anything positive. The three key things on which they argued 3.5 years ago. Firstly, that it will be easy to get a deal with the EU because they want to sell us BMWs and Prosecco, has proved not to be true. The second thing is we will take control for Parliament. Now they're trying to run an election of people against Parliament. The third thing is that doing trade deals with the rest of the world is going to be easy. And when you look at everything from the Department of Trade and Industry, that is not easy at all. And that is because ultimately what Mark wants to achieve, Mark Francois wants to achieve, which is sovereignty and self-government, is an illusion. And the reason why it's an illusion...
Why? Australia has it, Japan has it, why shouldn't Britain have it?
America has it.
The reason why it is ultimately, if you leave the EU and you're going to have to do a deal with the EU or the United States, whoever you do your biggest trade deal with, you are going to have to sign up to their standards. It's a bit like trying to play in the Champions League and saying, I still want my own rules, right? You're going to have to sign up to the Champions League rules or the Europa Cup League rules. That's the way the world system operates.
But they're also going to have to sign up to ours. It's a mutual agreement, isn't it?
That's what a trade agreement is.
But the powerful would always dictate the terms. And the difference with the EU is
that's an argument for never having a trade agreement.
We are at the top table.
Iceland has got a trade agreement with China. Now, with what you're saying, China would have totally dictated those terms. It's a mutual thing, isn't it?
Well, you go and ask countries like the Swiss, etc., and the Chinese dictate the terms. But what we have in the EU is that we are at the top table with a voice and a veto. And in leaving that, and going, we put ourselves in a position where we will have terms dictated to us. Now, all I'm saying is we should, if that's what Mark wants to do, fine, but we should go in with our eyes wide open.
Okay. Well, Mark, that's a valid point, isn't it? We do have a say and a veto here, and particularly on trade agreements. Inevitably, if you're part of a group of 560 million people, you're going to have more impact on a trade agreement than if you're a country of 65 million people.
Well, the difference will be when we've left, we can negotiate our own trade agreements with America or China or Brazil.
But would they be as good as the EU can negotiate, being a much bigger bloc?
Well, let's find out. But what we can't do at the moment is negotiate our own, because we can only do that through the European Union, because we're in a customs union. So you're trying to prove a negative. I believe the Americans have made it quite clear they want an early trade agreement. I was at the Conservative Party conference. I met the Australian High Commissioner. They're very keen to do an early trade agreement. So are a number of other nations. I see no reason why
Why is
it fantasy?
Why is it? Well, that's what the Australian High Commissioner told me, Sam.
The reason why it's fantasy is Australia is a country that deals basically in basic minerals. So it's copper, aluminium, and they trade heavily with China. So even if you did that Australian trade deal, the benefit to us, and this is the government's own analysis, will nowhere be near as significant as the benefit to us of doing the trade deal with the EU. Whatever we say.
Well, no one's saying it's one thing or the other, are they?
Sam, they're two different deals.
It isn't one thing or the other.
But
One's a deal with the EU, one's a deal with Australia.
But in being part of the EU and having a voice, we drive the direction. In leaving the EU would ultimately...
No, we don't drive anything. We're one of 28. We're not driving anything. We're in the back seat of the minivan.
Well, these two can go on knocking 8 bells out of each other, and it's joyous, of course, to watch them do it. But the truth of the matter is we've got to get to a trade deal with the European Union. Australia is the other side of the world. The European Union is 22 miles away. It's completely for the birds if we don't think we need a trade deal. And the trouble with the political behaviour that these two are demonstrating here, and that they all do
They're
down
being
at
quite
West,
polite given their previous performances on television, which I've seen before.
We're just warming up.
and
That's what worries me.
and that's going on at Westminster, is that it's making that trade deal that we're going to have to do after we have done Brexit more and more and more difficult, and that is really serious for the
let me
millions
just
of
put that
people
to you,
who need
Miatta.
jobs.
I mean, if we leave with no deal, there's obviously going to be a lot of bad blood between the two sides, regardless of who's to blame or whatever. That is going to make a free trade deal with the EU that much more difficult, is it not?
It is. I mean, so the whole rhetoric around no deal is just complete fantasy, lunacy. It's ridiculous. And if you decide to crash out, it makes it incredibly hard to negotiate that deal. But, the sort of chat that we crash out and Brexit is done is nonsense, because you crash out and the very next day you need to knock on the door of the EU and say, oh, by the way, we've got to deal with citizens, we've got to deal with our legal obligations, we've got to deal with our financial obligations before we can even start talking about a new trade deal. So this is like the beginning of the process, and I think if our politicians were being
we've had 3 years.
Well, I know, and that's the tragedy. We have had 3 years,
But
and
you
we
didn't
are
vote
at
for
the
a deal,
beginning.
Mark. Nor did I.
Right, we're at the beginning of this thing.
Right.
Leaving.
So you're
on,
both. You rather prove Mark's point there, don't you? Because you're on one. I'm not going to say. Well, I was going to say extreme of the argument, but I don't mean extreme. But you're firmly on. So if we're counting from 1 to 100, you're on 100. Mark's on 1, and never the twain shall meet.
I think the truth is, and I've been thinking about this a lot, is what we're choosing a future and a direction for our country. And when people say compromise, it's talking about splitting the difference, but a direction for the country where you're either hitching your wagon to the EU, hitching your wagon to the US, or bobbing in the mid-Atlantic on your own. They're very radically different visions. And I think the reason why this debate is so passionate in Parliament is people have very different visions of what our future should be.
Well,
and
I'm going to agree with Sam.
Can I?
Yeah,
whilst
sorry.
the referendum talked about
that
us
was an exciting moment.
No, but sorry, Sam.
Whilst the referendum was settle the issue of leaving, it never really settled the issue of where we go. And leaving somewhere and going somewhere are not the same thing. We'll all leave this building at the end of this interview, but we'll presumably be going to different places. And that decision of
Depends how well you get on.
where we're going is what Parliament has struggled to decide, not because people don't want to agree or people are just being whatever. It is the very different
Okay,
visions.
final word on this question to Mark.
Well, MPs do feel passionately about it because you're arguing about the destiny of your country. And if you're not going to get passionate about that, what are you going to get passionate about? So, why didn't I vote for the withdrawal agreement? Well, because I read it. And because it contained a customs union, we would never have left the European Union, which is completely at variance with what the people voted
You never know, we might come on to that a little bit later. Our next question is not about Brexit. Surprise,
Hallelujah.
surprise. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question on anything apart from Colleen Rooney. It's 18 minutes past 8.
Brexit. Follow it live on LBC.
I'm James O'Brien. Do join me for an exclusive recording of my Full Disclosure podcast for Global's Make Some Noise. Full Disclosure is a podcast where I sit down and have in-depth conversations with major names from the worlds of politics, entertainment or culture, people who don't always give lengthy interviews. This special recording will take place on Monday the 17th of February at the Leicester Square Theatre in London. To buy tickets, with all proceeds going to Global's Make Some Noise, just head over to lbc.co.uk.
Sheila Fogarty.
Twenty-one minutes past 8. If you would like to see our proceedings, you can do so on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, our YouTube channel, Facebook page or Twitter feed. There you can see the glorious visages of Sam Gyimah, Mark Francois, Miatta Fahnbulleh and Mark Fox. Let's go to our next question. David's in Camberley. You're not asking about Brexit, David. What are you asking about?
Yes, thank you, Ian, and panel. So good evening. President Trump's eccentricities have only affected the US to date, but with his recent announcement regarding Turkey, people's lives are now at risk. How should the UK react?
Sam Gyimah.
Well, I think this is the moment when, if our close and special relationship with the US counts for anything, we've got to be the critical friend. The Kurds have been allies with us in the fight against Daesh. A lot of Kurds have paid the ultimate price in that fight. I think about 11,000 of them paid that with their lives. And the decision by Trump, which allows Turkey to begin military operations in northern Syria, means that we are putting people who've worked with us and stood by us and their lives at risk. And I think what we should be doing is saying to President Trump, This is incredibly dangerous. Yes, ISIS is defeated for now, but it's still a risk, and Syria is in no way a country that we want to be further destabilized. So we should be standing up to him.
What did you make of Donald Trump's, shall we say, rather deranged tweet, using a very impartial word, yesterday about Turkey, saying sort of, if they go too far, well, I will ruin their economy. How can we take a president of the United States seriously who comes out with that kind of language?
Seriously, I thought he had been made up.
I did. I looked to see if it was really
I
him.
looked for the tick, because I just thought that, I mean, we've got used to Trump just completely doing things that are outside the boundaries of what is normal for any politician, much more the president of the United States. But it made me think that maybe with all these subpoenas, impeachment and all of that, that it's finally getting to him. It's also very clear that his own allies in Washington, people like Lindsey Graham, are against this. Many of his own advisors are against this. So it's difficult to discern what the clear strategy is, why he's pursuing it, and what he expects to gain from it. And that is why it's deeply worrying.
Mark Fox.
Well, we're seeing the unfolding of a tragedy on that Turkey-Syria border, with the Kurdish people caught in between these countries.
Not for the first time.
Not for the first time. So I would very much hope to see Dominic Raab flying out to Turkey to try and do some diplomacy. I think there's a lot of sort of soft power that we can deploy. I would not like to think that our political institutions are so seized up with Brexit that we can't think about other things. So I would hope that all policymakers would encourage the Foreign Secretary to get on a plane, get out there, let's get some dialogue going. I'm not saying that we'll be able to resolve it, but I don't see the EU, the United States, or other big power brokers around the world stepping up to the plate on this. So I think there is an opportunity for us to see what can and can't be done. So I would hope that our government will step up to the plate here, especially bearing in mind that the Prime Minister has a personal relationship with Turkey.
He does.
Has a personal family history, and that we would hope that he would be able to bring some insight to bear and some of his energy to bear in this area. And it would be very reassuring to see our government doing some stuff on the international stage that just wasn't always about Europe.
Miatta.
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree. So we're sort of starting to see the implications of having a renegade president, someone that does things that doesn't feel particularly rational, doesn't look particularly rational, doesn't play by the normal rules of the game. In the context where we've got a kind of global and international context that's very precarious. And I think, he claims we have a special relationship, and it is for countries like the UK to actually make our voices heard and be absolutely clear, doing it in a respectful way behind the scenes, that he's got to try to manage this and trying to just exert some pressure, because otherwise it's hugely dangerous, and it's not clear that the sort of natural brakes on him within Washington are having effect. And I think it's really, really worrying. I think we should all be really worried.
Mark?
I think we should be prepared to be a candid friend to the United States. Margaret Thatcher always was to Ronald Reagan and to George H.W. Bush. That seemed to work well for both parties. So if we don't agree with the Americans on something, I think we should have the moral courage to say so. But I also think we should talk directly to Turkey. Mark has a good point. The Prime Minister has strong historical links. If we think it's the Turks who are actually doing something...
Was it his grandfather or great-grandfather?
I think it was his grandfather, I think. But we have... Turkey is a NATO ally, as is America. I think we should be prepared to speak directly to President Erdogan, and I think we should remind him that even though they have a big issue with the Kurds historically, the Kurds helped to fight against ISIL, and Sam is correct. So we owe the Kurds a debt of honour, because when ISIL were going to overrun part of Iraq, the Kurds helped to stop them. So I think we should be prepared to speak as a candid friend to the United States, but I also think we should be prepared to speak even more candidly to Turkey.
So that's something that Mark and I agree on, by the way.
I am chalking that up.
Can you chalk that up?
Yes. We'll instantly move on.
Second thing.
Right, well, let's move on to something
There's
else.
half an hour left, Ian, don't worry.
Well, actually, before we finish, David, what do you think should happen very briefly?
I think it's very clear. Of course, Brexit is very important, but people's lives are genuinely now at risk. We're hearing reports that, bombings are happening, and it's easy to get distracted, but this is a genuine crisis. And we have a role to play. We should be upping the ante in terms of saying this clearly is something based on an eccentric approach, not a statesman approach. And with that in mind, the UK has a great record of dealing with doing the right thing, and we should just do the right thing.
Okay.
And we should stand up and say something and make a difference, as opposed to just watching the news and getting very frustrated.
All right, David, thank you. James is a first-time caller from Swindon. James, what would you like to ask?
Hi, good evening. I'd like to ask a question that's got not a lot to do with Brexit and politics as a whole, but we've seen more and more recently in the news and the press about climate change, and I'd like to ask the panel what they all think, or what they would all do individually about climate change to address the problems that we're facing today.
Well, you mean how would they change their lifestyles, or what would they do as politicians to make new laws?
As politicians, sorry.
Right, okay. Well, I think the first one would have been quite interesting. Miatta.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and it's actually brilliant that we're talking about climate change. And, we've got protesters in the streets of London. And I think the point that they're trying to make is, the threat of climate change is real. So the experts are telling us that we have little over a decade to take really radical, drastic action in order for us to just mitigate the worst, not even stop it, just mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. It is a bigger threat than Brexit. It blows everything else out the water. It is going to have a fundamental effect on our lives and on the economy. And it doesn't feel like there's the urgency in the political system in order for us to kind of respond in the way that we need to. So the thing that, my organisation, the New Economics Foundation, has been arguing for is a Green New Deal. And it's the idea that says, look, we've got to decarbonise at pace, which will require a huge programme of government investment. So the government needs to step up in order to catalyse the change, but to try to decarbonise in a way that will create jobs, that will lift living standards, that will start to try and shape the economy so that it works for people. And we need a scale of ambition. We need the government to think out the box. We need new regulations, new incentives.
Well, you're coming up with a lot of sort of motherhood and apple pie things there, but what do you actually want them to do? What policies do you want them to implement?
So, as a start, the Committee of Climate Change, which is the government's climate change watchdog, has come up with a list of green projects. So things like renewable energy, things like insulation projects, so that we're not
They're already
using...
doing that.
Well, no, not at the pace that they need to. And actually, the Committee on Climate Change has said, yes, the government's moved, but it's not moved nearly fast enough. And they are worried that we will struggle to hit even the, not that ambitious target of net zero by 2050. So there are already a suite of projects that we could actually just get away now, but it requires political will, and it requires the government to put in a level of investment that we've not seen before. The Committee for Climate Change says 1 to 2% of GDP. We actually think it probably needs to be much higher, about 3 to 4% of GDP. I mean, we've not done anything like that before. I think the second thing is the government has to say this is our number one mission, because, if you care about communities, you care about living standards, social justice, climate change is going to blow all of that out the water. And that requires the Treasury and other government departments to think about legislation, investment, regulation that starts to shift things and also kind of get the markets to respond.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to our other guests in a moment, but first let's get an LBC News Bulletin. It's 8:31. Here's Dominic Ellis.
The Irish government announced Boris Johnson will meet the Taoiseach privately tomorrow for detailed discussions about securing agreements for a Brexit deal. The confirmation comes after the EU's chief
There's even more to smile about with the Skoda Fahnbulleh.
8:35, Boris Johnson has just been talking to President Trump. Here's a readout from that conversation from a Downing Street spokesman. The Prime Minister spoke to President Trump this evening. The leaders expressed their serious concern at Turkey's invasion of northeast Syria and the risk of a humanitarian catastrophe in the region. The two leaders also discussed the tragic death of Harry Dunn. The Prime Minister urged the President to reconsider the US position so the individual involved can return to the UK, cooperate with police and allow Harry's family to receive justice. The President said he was fully aware of the case and deeply saddened by what had happened, and he expressed his condolences to Harry's parents. The leaders agreed to work together to find a way forward as soon as possible. On trade, the Prime Minister underlined his disappointment at the US announcement of tariffs against the UK and EU exports in the Airbus-Boeing dispute, which will harm a number of industries, including Scotch whisky. He pressed the President not to impose the tariffs. No word on the President's reply on that one. Let me reintroduce my cross-question panel to you. Mark Fox is Chief Executive of the Business Services Association. Miatta Fahnbulleh is Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation. Mark Francois, Conservative MP for Rayleigh, and Sam Gyimah, Liberal Democrat MP for East Surrey. You can watch us on YouTube, on the LBC website, Facebook page or Twitter feed. Now, we were answering a question from James on climate change. Miatta's already answered it. He was asking what policy should the government implement to ameliorate climate change. Mark Fox.
So great credit to the government, and I suspect that both Mark and Sam have voted for it, so great credit to them, is that they have already implemented the most significant piece of legislation since the Second World War on this, which was Mrs May's introduction of the decarbonisation bill by 2050, which is going to upend the economy from one end to north to south, west to east, is going to change all of our lives, change the way the economy works, change every single business. It's going to have the most profound impact. It's going to make Brexit look like the sort of teddy bear's picnic. And she did all this in her last 24 hours in Number 10, and it sailed through Parliament because everybody thought, bless her, let's do it for her. And, you know, we've been so beastly, so we're going to do something nice. And they're all sitting there and they don't know what they've done. But I can tell you, across Whitehall, when you talk to very serious senior officials who are all very excited about it because they think it's, you know, they are, you know, they're working very closely with business and all sorts of other institutions because this is now the single biggest policy thing, right? The politicians are over here to the left doing their stuff on Brexit, and over here, business and Whitehall are looking at this next period of time because this is the big thing.
Sam Gyimah, you knew not what you voted for, according to Mark.
Oh, I think I do, in this context anyway. And this is the biggest challenge, or one of the big challenges of our time, the climate emergency. And I think that's why sort of on the Liberal Democrat side anyway, we've been thinking really about the practical things you need to do to actually achieve the net zero target. And the first thing is in Whitehall, currently the Department for Climate Change is tucked into the Department for Business. And I would say if government is going to show that this is a really big challenge that we want to focus on, it should have its own department and its own Secretary of State. And then within that, we need to look at very specific things.
Which it used to when the Liberal Democrats were in the coalition, didn't it?
Yeah, it used to. I mean, renewable energy, big focus, banning the sales of diesel and petrol cars, bringing that forward, doing it quickly, bringing back
so when?
I think it's 2030 now, bring it to 2025. I could have got the date wrong, but doing it much sooner than it is, because that would accelerate the introduction and the move towards alternatives. I would say that looking at our more energy efficient homes, the Green Investment Bank to focus on investing in new and innovative ideas, but working with business. I think where I agree with Mark is business has a big role to play.
And we have to tease Sam slightly here, don't we? Because it was under the Conservative Prime Ministership of Theresa May, with the Conservative MP Sam going in loyally to support his leader to push through the biggest piece of
But didn't the
legislation.
Liberal Democrats vote for it as well?
I don't know. Did Sam know who they were at the time? Did he recognise who they were?
This is one of those issues on which there is
but I'm only
cross-party
teasing,
support.
just teasing.
All right, Mark Francois.
Well, it's a global challenge, so it needs a global solution. So we should adhere
Doesn't
to
it help to be a member of the EU then?
Well, you don't need to be a member
sure
of the
does.
EU to fight climate change. We should adhere to the Paris Accords. I think it's disappointing that President Trump says he doesn't.
Yeah.
We've signed up to be carbon neutral by 2050. I believe that's, with technology, we could probably beat that. I believe that business and science will come up with more innovations that will help us to bring that date forward, but we've set a target and an aim. We should stick to it and try and beat it. But, with regard to the protests that are going on, I think people have made their point. I mean, personally, I would encourage them to stop blocking the streets and to go and protest outside the Chinese embassy, because they're opening a coal-fired power station once a fortnight. They are now the world's biggest or second largest emitter. If you want to do something about climate change, go and protest outside the Chinese embassy and ask them to do something about it, and let Londoners go about their daily business.
So if I could just come in there. So absolutely, China and other countries need to do more.
They do.
But historically, the UK have been a big emitter. So,
but we're nothing like the scale of China or America.
Not now, but if you think about our long-term historical trajectory, we were the ones pumping the stuff into the atmosphere.
But we're not now.
Absolutely. But the point is, yes, we've moved, but we've not moved nearly far enough.
I'm not saying we don't have a responsibility to do anything. But I'm saying focus on the people that are the worst villains.
If we were serious about getting to net zero before 2050, we wouldn't be talking about the expansion of Heathrow. We wouldn't have, fuel duty subsidies that amount to about 12 billion a year. So yes, there is the rhetoric. I believe that actually our politicians generally believe this is a proper threat. They believe it's serious, but actually the sort of action, the focus, the difficult decisions. So we've decarbonised, but we've done all the easy stuff, right? We've taken carbon out of...
Look, if you want to come to my constituency and tell my constituents you want to put up the price of petrol, good luck.
Yeah, it's really difficult. This is my point. But we're not having...
But I wouldn't.
But we're not having the political debate about how difficult this is going to be that will force the innovation in the market. So as long as you say it's okay for us to expand Heathrow, as long as you say we're going to continue subsidising fuel, as long as, we're doing the easy stuff, we got nowhere near heat, which is where actually the next frontier is.
By your logic, I mean, if we were going to go that far, we would ban all cars, we would kill all cows, because they're the cause of a lot of methane emissions, apparently. We should all go vegan. These are things that the general public are not going to accept.
Well, no, I don't believe that, but we'll have to do things in a very different way. And so I believe that technological solutions will be part of the answer.
But they already are, aren't they? Because if you look at, for example, aircraft emissions, they're a fraction of what they used to be. And unless we go to the point of saying, well, everyone can only travel X thousand miles a year, or we ban air travel for certain groups of people, or make it so expensive that normal people can't afford it, that's the only way that you're going to achieve what you seem to want to achieve.
Well, the truth of the matter is, so you take something like air travel, and actually if you tot up the numbers and you look at who is doing the air travel, the top 5% actually do the majority of air travel. And so there's a question about, well, actually, I do think you should probably oppose a levy on air travel in order to then cross-subsidise other things like public transport that the majority of the public uses.
But there's already a big levy on air travel. It's called air passenger duty.
Well, there has to be, I think, a higher levy. So this is my point. You say it's a bigger threat. You're going to
price normal people out of air travel, aren't you? That's what's going to happen.
Well, so I think there are... I mean, you can't get around it. This is difficult. It's going to be difficult. We're going to have to make some tough choices.
Hang on. Look, sorry. I really object to Emma Thompson flying the Atlantic first class to stand on a pink boat in the middle of Oxford Circus to imply that my constituents can't go to Malaga for 2 weeks for their summer holiday.
Which is why I'm saying... tack an air travel levy on top of that. I completely agree with you on that.
Air passenger duty is high enough as it is.
Well, so the point is, I don't think...
We're focusing on one aspect.
Mark and then Sam.
Yeah, but hold on, because the government has put in place legislation with the support of these two, so I don't know why Mark's arguing, just because he needs the exercise, to achieve what you are saying needs to be done within a foreseeable time frame. So you will not be able to fly a plane into Heathrow, even if it takes over the whole of Windsor Great Park, right, if it is not decarbonised.
Yeah.
This is what we're saying. So the truth of the matter is that these two and Mrs May and the government have done exactly what you want.
Which is why we're joyous. But my point is, I don't think they realise the implications of it. And the fact they're not willing to have a political debate about the
final word to
trade-offs
Sam.
is the reason why we haven't had the pace and urgency that we need.
Very happy to have a debate.
Which is what we need to have.
Final word to
I
Sam.
think with these debates, it's very easy to focus on kind of one marginal example. We're talking about renewable homes. We're talking about getting rid of fossil fuels. We're talking about renewable energy. We're talking about more energy efficient cars. I mean, there are huge swathes of our life that need to change, that we can change. And I think the debate is only constructive if we focus on those things rather than issues that where we think we'll disagree the most. There is a lot to be done.
Right. Actually, the final word is going to go to Lee in Grays, who says, I've just got home after policing Extinction Rebellion for 16 hours. Unfortunately, the vast majority of them are so off their faces on drugs, they don't know what day of the week it is, let alone the climate change argument. They're just holding London to ransom. Well, that is one view from somebody who was policing the event. I'm sure that you will have different ones. We might take some calls on that a little bit later, or we might not. Who knows? We've got two more questions that I want to get through before 9 o'clock. Both very interesting questions from Danny and Max. We'll come to them in just a moment. It's 8:45.
Eddie Mayer, Monday to Friday from 4 p.m. on LBC.
Forgive me, these are legitimate questions, not attacks.
I would say to you, the city...
LBC.
It's 11 minutes to 9. I'm going to ask our panel for some shortish answers to the next two questions so we can fit them both in. Sam Gyimah, Mark Francois, Miatta Fahnbulleh and Mark Fox with us. Danny is in Kilburn. Danny, what's your question, please?
I'd like to ask the panel what they think of the current parliamentary rules which allow
an MP to be elected by the constituency representing one party, and then sometime later decide that party doesn't suit them anymore, defect to a rival opposing party, and carry on representing that constituency for possibly 3-4 more years till the next general election without triggering a by-election and having to be voted in again.
I imagine you're directing that primarily at Sam Gyimah. Sam, why haven't you called a by-election in your constituency?
Well, the first thing is that I had the whip withdrawn from me. So the reason why I was not in the Conservative Party is that Boris Johnson withdrew the whip. And I think that it is within my rights in that situation to find a parliamentary grouping that I feel comfortable with. As an MP,
what about Heidi Allen then?
Can I finish my... As an MP, I represent all my constituents. When I represent my constituents, I never divide them into those who voted for me and those who didn't vote for me. So whether as a Liberal Democrat or as a Conservative, I do precisely that. And the third thing is, we all know there is an election round the corner. So voters will be able to have their say.
Sarah Wollaston, your colleague, used to be in the Conservatives, now also in the Liberal Democrat. She tabled a bill in 2011 where she wanted MPs who did defect to other parties to be obliged to fight by-elections, and yet she's done exactly what she said other MPs shouldn't do. There's a word for that, isn't there?
Well, I haven't seen that bill. I didn't sign it myself. But I think what we're seeing, to be honest, with Brexit is that party loyalties are being shaken to the core. I moved to the Liberal Democrats. There are now 20 Conservative MPs who don't represent any party. And in the Labour Party, there are a number of MPs that are nominally in the Labour Party, but actually don't see themselves in the Labour Party in any way. There are lots of independents in the Conservative Party. So we are having a historical aberration in Parliament now where Brexit is just shaking lots of loyalties out. But it's not just in Parliament, it's also amongst voters. Lots of voters are changing their loyalties based on that. And that's a part of what Brexit is about.
Mark?
So we elect individuals, not parties, into seats. Mark and Sam were elected as individuals. They happen to align themselves with a particular party interest at a given time. This is not new in our history, our parliamentary history. Winston Churchill pottered about between different political parties, and maybe Sam will follow the path back, a very august example that he can follow, and nobody will be happier than Mark, I'm sure, to welcome him back.
Mark?
I think you're flattering Sam to compare him with Winston Churchill, to be honest, Mark.
He's got great foresight.
Yep, Sam.
But I didn't intend to follow him.
Sam, some months ago I challenged you on a different radio programme to deny that you would defect to the Liberals. You flat promised you wouldn't. You stressed in another interview that you'd been readopted by your local Conservative Party and that they were behind you. And then a month later, in return for their loyalty, you basically buggered off anyway.
The whip was withdrawn.
Yeah, yes, but you asked them to support you. What did you expect me to do? You asked them to support you, and they did, and you threw it back in their face.
No.
So
can I say something? Can I just say something?
You can in a sec. I'll ask you a question, and then you can answer it.
No, you brought me to your answer.
No, I haven't finished yet.
You have spent so much of your time saying you want to purge people like me from the party, and when we leave, you talk about betrayal.
Are you going to re-stand in your constituency at the general election? Yes or no?
I don't think it's any of your business what I do.
Well, so you're not?
No, it's none of your business.
Because a lot of people want to know, hang on, you said all this about your constituents. If you're popular, naturally you would want to stand where people like you.
It's none of your business.
So why do they call you Silent Sam in East Surrey?
You know what?
He's very discreet.
Can I say something?
Well, why do they call... What's the name for?
You are the poster child of the Conservative Party.
Bless you.
You are what conservatism represents. I'm happy for you.
So are you re-standing in your constituency or not, Sam? Your constituents have a right to know.
Mark, let me ask that question.
But you are not my constituent, so you do not have a right to know.
No, but they're listening now.
They're listening now. There will be people. I mean, a lot of people in Surrey do listen to this programme. I'm sure they would be interested in
yes
the answer.
or no?
When I'm in a position to make an announcement as to what I'll do in the next election, I will let my constituents
But the election could be only 3 weeks away. Heidi Allen has already said she's standing in her constituency.
I'm not in a position to make that.
So you're not going to fight a by-election?
Mark, can you let me do my job?
Okay.
Why not? Why aren't you in that position?
Well, I've only just joined a new political party. Do I stand? There are lots of things I need to think about.
A few weeks now.
Yeah.
When I'm in a position to do it, I will do it.
Are you doing the chicken run or not? Come on.
When I'm in a position to do it, I'll do it.
Well, if I were a constituent of yours, I'd be pretty unimpressed with that.
Miatta.
But you're not.
Fortunately, no.
So I think under normal times, people in constituencies vote with strong allegiances to particular parties. Yes, it's about the individual, but very often it's also about the party brand. So in normal times, then yes, you would have a by-election, but we're not really in normal times. I think our politics is very up in the air. I think it's very volatile, reflecting the politics in the country. And actually, I don't really think in the context of a Brexit crisis, it would really make sense for a whole lot of MPs that are being thrust around because of Brexit to be hosting a whole lot of by-elections.
Right,
I don't think it would be helpful.
Let's squeeze in one more question. Max is in Hackney. Hello, Max.
Hi there, Ian.
Hi.
So it's just a really quick one about the Speaker, and I just want to know who the panellists think should succeed Mr. Bercow, and what kind of impact that they think he's had on the role of Speaker, and how that may change in the future. Just to get the motion of the question, could I also ask Mr. Francois to move his face back from the microphone, just because it's incredibly distracting hearing his breathing.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, let's concentrate on the future rather than analyse John Bercow's qualities or lack of them. Who should succeed John Bercow? Mark Francois.
Whoever it is, it will have to be a candidate who enjoys the confidence of the whole House of Commons, and someone who members on all sides of the House believe will be impartial. The Speaker's job is to chair debate, not to participate in it. Personally, I will vote for Eleanor Lang. There are a number of good candidates. I'm not going to list them all, but we're fortunate we have a number of good choices, but I will vote for Ellie Lang.
Sam?
I think I agree with a lot of what Marcus said there in terms of what you expect from a speaker. But by definition, whoever wins the contest enjoys the confidence of the House. That's what the elections are about. I think Harriet Harman's good. I think I like Eleanor Lang. I think Chris Bryant is good. I think there are a lot of good people. At the moment, Chris Bryant would be to get my first preference.
Mark?
Well, I think it's one of those unique House of Commons moments. In a sense, it's very private to the House of Commons because, there are 650 odd people choosing someone from among their number who they have confidence in. I think the example of the last one or two elections is that the House of Commons has not worked well together to produce somebody that had a good sort of durability in the job. I think there were a range of good candidates, and I think it will be very interesting to see how it plays out.
So who would you support?
Not going to say.
Oh, come on. You cannot have a go at them for not giving their views. Come on, I'm going to push you on that.
So I would say that if the House of Commons was behaving along with tradition and with historical precedent, it's time that a Labour candidate had a go.
Which one?
I think the current Deputy Speaker is...
Lindsay Hoyle. Okay, we've got it out of him eventually. He's not even a politician. Miatta.
I'd quite like to see a woman as Speaker. I think there's some kind of bridge building that needs to be done across Parliament. So someone like Harriet Harman, I think, would be very good. She's Mother of the House. She's well respected. I think she has a sort of tact and diplomacy to try and knit our House of Commons together, which is what we need to do at the end of all of this.
Do you think Conservative MPs would vote for Harriet Harman?
If she reaches out, they ought to. They ought to.
She has described herself as continuity Bercow, I think I read somewhere, which I'm not sure is the way to get Tory MPs to vote for her. Interesting range there. Max, thank you for your question. Final text question from Judy in Birmingham, who's done us proud. I'd like to ask the panel, if you were to take part in Strictly or Dancing on Ice, who would be your same-sex partner? If you're listening to this on the podcast, it's because we talked about the fact in the news hour that Dancing on Ice are going to have their first same-sex partnership, including H from Steps. Miatta.
I think Alicia Dixon.
Okay. Mark?
Well, you, of course.
Oh, my God. I hope you've got good feet, because I'd be treading on them. Mark Francois?
Tom Cruise, because he's my height.
Sam Gyimah.
Mark Francois. I'd quite like to do the jive with him.
Well, there we are.
I think our evening is complete at that point, don't you? What could possibly go
Wrong, ladies and gentlemen.
Get more of us on the podcast if you'd like to. The Cross Question podcast will be available for download at 10 if Henry gets his gets his skates on. You can also watch the whole thing back on our YouTube channel as well. More Cross Question next Wednesday at 8. Thanks to Sam Gyimah, Mark Francois, Miatta Fahnbulleh and Mark Fox. Coming up in a moment, I'm going to be asking you this. EU leaders have pulled apart the UK's Brexit proposals, accusing Boris Johnson of putting forward untested ideas to solve the Irish border question. Where does this leave the United Kingdom? You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's coming up to 9 o'clock.